The room went silent the moment Sophie walked in. Not the comfortable kind of silence that settles over afternoon tea. This was different. This was the kind of silence that happens when lightning is about to strike. Before we continue with this incredible story, make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell icon. Stories like this one deserve to be heard. You won't want to miss what happens next. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, had attended hundreds of royal gatherings over the years. She knew how to smile politely, how to navigate difficult conversations, how to keep her composure when tensions ran high. But today was different. Today, something inside her had shifted. The Windsor Guardroom was not a place where confrontations typically happened. It was a space of tradition, of quiet formality, where guards changed shifts and senior royals occasionally gathered for private discussions away from the public eye. The stone walls held decades of whispered conversations. But nothing quite like what was about to unfold. Camilla stood near the fireplace, a teacup balanced delicately in her hand. She was mid-sentence, speaking to two ladies-in-waiting about upcoming royal engagements. Her voice carried the confident tone of someone who had finally grown comfortable in her role as queen consort. Years of public scrutiny had hardened her, taught her to deflect criticism with practiced ease. Sophie entered through the heavy wooden door, her footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Several guards stood at attention along the walls, their eyes forward, their expressions neutral. They were trained to be invisible, to witness without reacting. But even they could sense something was about to happen. Camilla glanced up, her smile polite but distant. "Sophie, darling. I didn't expect to see you here today." Sophie didn't return the smile. Her jaw was set, her eyes focused with an intensity that made the ladies-in-waiting exchange nervous glances. They had never seen the usually gentle Duchess look quite like this. "We need to talk," Sophie said quietly. Her voice was steady, but there was steel underneath it. "About Diana?" The name hung in the air like a bell that couldn't stop ringing. Diana, even now. Decades after her death, that name carried weight in royal circles. It was a name that opened old wounds, that reminded everyone of painful history. It made people uncomfortable. Camilla's expression flickered. Just for a moment, her composure cracked. Then she recovered, setting her teacup down with deliberate care. "I'm not sure this is the appropriate time or place." "It's exactly the right time and place," Sophie interrupted. Interrupting royalty was not something that happened often. The ladies-in-waiting looked at each other again, uncertain whether they should leave or stay. One of the guards shifted almost imperceptibly, his attention drawn to the unfolding scene despite his training. Camilla straightened her spine, her chin lifting slightly. "What exactly do you think you need to say to me about Diana?" Sophie took 3 steps closer. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't losing control. But her presence filled the room in a way it hadn't moments before. "I need to say what everyone else has been too polite to say for years. What the family has tiptoed around because it's easier to move forward than to face the truth." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Outside, London continued its busy rhythm, but inside this room, time seemed to have stopped. The guards remained motionless, but every single one of them was listening now. This was history happening in real time. Camilla's face had gone pale. "Sophie, I understand you were close to Diana. But this isn't about my friendship with her," Sophie said, her voice rising just slightly. "This is about her legacy. About her sons. About the way her memory has been quietly erased to make room for a more comfortable narrative." One of the ladies-in-waiting cleared her throat nervously. "Perhaps we should give you privacy." "No," Sophie said firmly, not taking her eyes off Camilla. "Stay. This concerns all of us. Every person who wears a title and pretends the past doesn't matter." Camilla's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. For all her years of learning to handle pressure, she had not prepared for this. "Not from Sophie?" "Not here. Not now. What do you want from me?" Camilla asked. And for the first time, there was something vulnerable in her voice. Sophie's next words would change everything. The guards would remember them. The ladies-in-waiting would repeat them in hushed tones, and Camilla would never forget them. "I want you to stop pretending she never mattered," Sophie said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I want you to acknowledge that you're standing in a space she should have occupied. That you're wearing a title that broke her heart. Camilla flinched. Actually flinched. The guards saw it. The ladies in waiting saw it. There was no hiding from the truth when it was spoken that plainly. That's not fair, Camilla began, but Sophie shook her head. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Sophie's composure was cracking now, emotion bleeding through her carefully maintained control. Diana died thinking the world had turned against her. She died believing her own family saw her as the problem. And now, all these years later, we act as if that's just ancient history. As if her pain doesn't still echo in her son's eyes every time they see you. The fire popped loudly, making one of the ladies in waiting jump. The sound seemed to punctuate Sophie's words, giving them even more weight. Camilla's face had gone from pale to flushed. I have never tried to replace Diana. I have always respected. Sophie's laugh was bitter, unlike any sound the Duchess had ever made in public. You can't respect someone you helped destroy. You can't honor a memory you've spent years trying to make people forget. This was dangerous territory now. Everyone in the room knew it. Speaking this openly about royal history, about the affair that had torn apart a marriage and captivated the world, was not done. These were the things whispered about in private, never confronted directly. One of the guards later told his wife that he had never heard such raw honesty in all his years of service, that he had stood in the presence of queens and prime ministers. But this moment felt more real than any of them. Camilla's hands were shaking visibly now. I have tried, she said, and her voice cracked. I have tried for years to do right by this family, to support Charles. To serve the crown? What more do you want from me? I want you to say her name, Sophie replied. The room seemed to hold its breath. I want you to stop acting like Diana was just an inconvenient chapter in Charles's life. She was a person. She was a mother. She was my friend. And she deserved better than to be erased from her own story. Tears were forming in Sophie's eyes now, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. Let everyone see her grief, her anger, her love for the woman who had been gone for so long but whose absence still shaped everything. You think I don't know that? Camilla's voice rose for the first time, losing its practiced calm. You think I don't live with that every single day? That I don't see her in William's face, in Harry's eyes? That I don't know exactly what I took from her? The confession hung in the air like smoke. The ladies in waiting looked at each other in shock. This was not the composed queen consort they knew. This was something raw and undefended. Sophie took another step forward. They were only a few feet apart now. Two women, both carrying decades of complicated royal history, finally saying the things that had been locked away for too long. Then why do you never speak of her? Sophie demanded. Why does the palace act as if she's an embarrassment? Why are her photos removed from public spaces? Why do her charities get less attention now than they did when she was alive? Because it's easier, Camilla whispered, and the honesty of it was startling. Because every time her name comes up, it reminds everyone of my sin, of what Charles and I did, of the pain we caused. So yes, we stay quiet. We move forward. We pretend the past is the past. But it's not the past, Sophie said firmly. Not when her sons are still healing. Not when the world still mourns her. Not when little children wear shirts with her face on them because they've learned about the people's princess who died too young. One of the guards later said he had to blink back tears during this exchange, that it had taken everything in him to maintain his professional stance while listening to such profound pain being laid bare. Camilla sank into a chair, her royal bearing finally collapsing under the weight of the conversation. What do you want me to do, Sophie? Tell me, what would make this right? Sophie sat down across from her, her anger giving way to something deeper, sadness, exhaustion, the burden of carrying this for so many years. I want you to remember her publicly, Sophie said softly. I want you to speak at the next Diana memorial. I want you to acknowledge that she paved the way for so much of the modernization you now benefit from. I want you to be brave enough to face what you've spent decades avoiding. The request was impossible. Everyone in the room knew it. The palace would never allow it. The media would have a field day. It would reopen wounds that had been carefully managed for years. But something in Camilla's expression shifted. You're asking me to commit public suicide? Camilla said quietly. The moment I stand up and speak about Diana, every headline will call me a hypocrite. Every critic will tear me apart. The family will be furious. Sophie leaned forward, her eyes locked on Camilla's. Then you'll finally understand what Diana lived with every single day. The scrutiny, the judgment, the impossible position of trying to do right when the world has already decided you're wrong. The parallel was sharp and painful. Camilla looked away, staring into the fire as if it might offer her an escape from this conversation. But there was no escape. Sophie had cornered her with truth, and truth had a way of demanding acknowledgement. She called me once, Camilla said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. After the divorce was finalized, Diana called me. The room seemed to freeze. This was not a known story. The ladies in waiting leaned in slightly, forgetting their discretion. Even the guards seemed to hold their breath. Sophie's expression softened with surprise. What did she say? Camilla's hands twisted in her lap, a nervous gesture that betrayed her usual composed exterior. She said she knew Charles would eventually marry me, that she had accepted it. But she asked me for one thing. Camilla's voice broke. She asked me to be kind to her sons, to never try to replace her in their hearts, to remember that they had already lost so much. Tears were streaming down Camilla's face now, ruining her careful makeup. And I promised her. I swore to her on that phone call that I would honor that. That I would never try to be their mother, only their father's wife. Sophie's own tears fell faster. Have you kept that promise? I've tried, Camilla said desperately. God knows I've tried. But how do you honor someone's memory when your very existence is an insult to it? How do you show respect to a woman you helped betray? The question hung between them, unanswerable and raw. One of the ladies in waiting quietly dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. This was not the royal drama they had expected. This was something deeper, more human than palace politics usually allowed. Sophie reached across the space between them and took Camilla's hand. The gesture shocked everyone in the room. These two women, connected by their love for the same family, but divided by history, were touching, were showing vulnerability to each other. You honor her by telling the truth, Sophie said gently. You honor her by admitting what happened and why it was wrong. You honor her by making sure her legacy lives on, even if it's uncomfortable for you. Camilla gripped Sophie's hand like it was a lifeline. The palace will never allow it. Charles will be devastated. The advisors will say it's too risky. Then you have a choice to make, Sophie replied. You can keep living in the shadow of a woman whose ghost you refuse to acknowledge, or you can step into the light and face what you've been running from for decades. Outside the guardroom, footsteps approached. Someone was coming. The moment was about to be interrupted, the bubble of raw honesty about to burst. Camilla pulled her hand back quickly, wiping at her tears with trembling fingers. The door opened and a palace secretary stepped in, then froze at the sight before him. Two tear-stained royals, guards standing witness to something clearly significant. Ladies in, waiting, looking deeply uncomfortable. My apologies, he stammered. I didn't realize I can come back. No, Camilla said, her voice steadier than it had been moments before. She stood up, smoothing her dress, rebuilding her composure like a wall being reconstructed brick by brick. I was just leaving. She looked at Sophie, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps. Or maybe just an acknowledgement that this conversation, difficult as it had been, was necessary. Think about what I said, Sophie urged quietly. Think about what you owe her. What you owe her sons. What you owe yourself. Camilla nodded once, a small movement that might have been agreement or might have been just acknowledgement that she had heard. Then she walked toward the door, her steps careful and measured. Every inch the queen consort again, but just before she left, she paused. Without turning around, she spoke one more time. She was extraordinary, wasn't she? Diana, she was genuinely extraordinary. Sophie's breath caught. Yes, she was. Camilla left then, the door closing softly behind her. The secretary scurried after her, leaving Sophie alone with the guards and the ladies in waiting. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. They were all processing what they had just witnessed. One of the ladies in waiting finally broke the silence. "Your Royal Highness, that was... necessary," Sophie finished. That was necessary. She stood up, smoothing her own dress, collecting herself. But unlike Camilla, she didn't try to pretend the emotion hadn't happened. She let it sit on her face, in her eyes, a testament to the fact that some conversations were worth the tears they cost. "What happens now?" one of the guards asked, forgetting protocol in the aftermath of such an unusual scene. Sophie looked at him and managed a small, sad smile. "Now we wait. We wait to see if courage wins over comfort. We wait to see if the truth finally gets its day." She walked toward the door, then paused, just as Camilla had. But Sophie turned back to face the room. "What you witnessed here today," she said, addressing the guards and ladies in waiting directly, "was not a scandal. It was not gossip. It was two women trying to make peace with a painful past. I trust that will be remembered correctly if anyone asks." They all nodded, understanding the assignment. They would keep this story safe. They would tell it right if they told it at all. 3 days passed without any word from Camilla. Sophie went about her royal duties with her usual grace, attending engagements, cutting ribbons, smiling for cameras, but everyone close to her could see the tension in her shoulders. The way her mind seemed elsewhere, even as she made polite conversation. Edward, her husband, found her one evening staring out the window of their private sitting room. Rain streaked down the glass, distorting the lights of London beyond. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Sophie didn't look at him. "Did I? Or did I just make everything worse?" "You spoke truth to power. That's never the wrong thing, even if it's uncomfortable." "The palace is furious with me," Sophie said. 3 different advisors have called. They're worried about what I might have set in motion, as if Diana's memory is some kind of bomb that will explode if we acknowledge it. Diana was your friend. You have every right to defend her legacy. But at what cost? Sophie turned to face him, her eyes reflecting her worry. What if this damages William and Harry? What if bringing all this up again just hurts them more? It was a valid fear. The princes had spent years trying to navigate the impossible terrain of honoring their mother while maintaining relationships with their father and his wife. Sophie's confrontation could complicate that delicate balance. Then you talk to them, Edward suggested. Before anything else happens, you talk to William and Harry. You tell them what you did and why. Sophie nodded slowly. He was right. Whatever happened next, the princes deserved to hear about the confrontation from her, not from palace gossip or leaked reports. She made the call that night. William answered on the 3rd ring, his voice warm despite the late hour. "Sophie, it's good to hear from you." "I need to tell you something," she said, dispensing with pleasantries. "About your mother. About Camilla. About a conversation that happened 3 days ago." There was a pause. Then William's voice came back, quieter. "I heard something had happened. The palace has been in chaos mode." "Tell me." So Sophie told him everything. The guardroom. The confrontation. The tears. Camilla's confession about Diana's phone call. The request that Camilla speak publicly about Diana's legacy. She left nothing out, letting William hear the full truth. When she finished, silence stretched between them. Sophie waited, her heart pounding, unsure how he would react. "You stood up for my mother," William finally said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "After all these years, someone finally stood up for her." "She was my friend," Sophie said simply, "and she deserved better than to be forgotten." "She's not forgotten," William replied firmly. "Not by us. Not by the people who loved her. But you're right that the palace has tried to minimize her, to make her memory smaller so it doesn't overshadow the present." "Are you angry with me?" Sophie asked. "For pushing this? For confronting Camilla?" William was quiet for a moment. "No, I'm grateful. Someone needed to say it. Someone needed to force this conversation into the open. It might as well be you." Relief flooded through Sophie. "And Harry?" "Let me talk to him," William said. "This will be harder for him. He's still so angry about everything. But he'll understand eventually. They talked for a few more minutes, then said their goodbyes. Sophie felt lighter than she had in days. Whatever happened next, at least William understood. At least he approved. But the real test came the following morning when Sophie received an unexpected visitor. Camilla arrived at Sophie's residence without announcement, without security detail, without any of the usual royal protocol. She simply showed up at the door like a neighbor stopping by for tea. Sophie's staff were flustered, unsure how to handle the queen consort appearing unannounced. But Sophie waved away their concerns and led Camilla to her private study, closing the door firmly behind them. "This is highly irregular," Sophie said. "Not sitting down, not offering refreshment. You showing up like this?" "I know," Camilla replied. She looked tired, her face showing every year of her age. "But I needed to tell you something face to face, not through intermediaries or official channels." Sophie waited, her expression neutral. Camilla took a deep breath. "I'm going to do it. I'm going to speak at the Diana Memorial. I'm going to acknowledge her publicly, honestly. The way you asked?" Sophie's eyes widened in shock. "The palace will never approve that." "I don't care," Camilla said, and there was something fierce in her voice that Sophie had never heard before. "You were right. I've been a coward. I've let fear and comfort dictate my actions for too long. If I'm going to be queen consort, if I'm going to hold this position that should have been hers, then I owe her the truth." Sophie sank into a chair, stunned. "Camilla, do you understand what you're saying? The backlash will be enormous. The media will crucify you. Every old wound will be reopened." "I know," Camilla said calmly. "But I had a dream last night. Diana was in it. She was standing in a garden, and she looked at me and said, 'Be brave.' Just that. Be brave." Camilla's voice cracked. I don't know if it was really her, or just my guilty conscience. But either way, the message was clear. Sophie stood and crossed to Camilla, taking both of her hands. "This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. I know. Charles will be furious. I know. The advisors will try to stop you. I know." Sophie searched Camilla's face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, but she found only determination. "Then I'll help you," Sophie said firmly. "We'll do this together. You won't face the storm alone." Camilla's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you help me? After everything?" "Because this isn't about you and me," Sophie replied. "This is about honoring Diana, and if you're finally brave enough to do that, then I'll stand beside you." For her sake. The two women embraced then, an awkward, tearful hug between two people who had never been friends but who now shared a common purpose. When they pulled apart, both were crying. "When?" Sophie asked. "When will you do it?" "The memorial is in 6 weeks," Camilla said. "I'll tell Charles tonight. I'll inform the palace tomorrow. And then we'll prepare." The next 6 weeks were a storm of activity, conflict, and emotion. Charles was, as predicted, furious. He argued with Camilla for hours, insisting that this would damage the monarchy, that it would undo years of careful reputation management, that it was unnecessary and dangerous. But Camilla stood firm. For perhaps the first time in their long relationship, she refused to bend to his will. "This isn't about you," she told him during one particularly heated exchange. "This is about making peace with the past. With her. And I'm doing it whether you support me or not." The palace advisors were even more hostile. They called emergency meetings, drafted memos outlining all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Tried every tactic they could think of to change Camilla's mind. But she had made her decision, and Sophie stood beside her through every battle. Sophie helped Camilla write the speech. They went through dozens of drafts, each one attempting to strike the impossible balance between honesty and diplomacy. Between acknowledging the past and not destroying the present. It was exhausting, emotional work. How do I say I'm sorry for helping to break her heart without making Charles the villain? Camilla asked during one late-night writing session. "You tell the truth simply," Sophie replied. "You acknowledge the pain that was caused without assigning blame. You focus on Diana, not on the affair. You honor who she was, not what happened to her." They worked by lamplight, cups of tea growing cold on the table between them, tissues scattered around them from the tears that came during difficult revisions. This was more than speech writing. This was an exorcism of decades of guilt, denial, and unspoken grief. William called Sophie 3 times during those weeks. Each time he asked the same question: is she really going to do this? And each time, Sophie gave the same answer: yes, she's going to do this. Harry was harder to reach. He didn't return Sophie's calls, didn't respond to her messages. His silence was louder than any words could have been. Sophie knew he was struggling with this, torn between wanting his mother honored and not wanting to give Camilla any credit for doing so. Finally, the week before the memorial, Harry called. "I want to read the speech," he said without preamble. "Before she gives it, I want to know what she's going to say about my mother." Sophie and Camilla met him in a private room at Kensington Palace. Harry looked tired, his eyes shadowed with the same grief he had carried for years. He took the printed pages from Camilla's trembling hands without looking at her, began to read. The room was silent except for the sound of papers rustling as Harry turned each page. Sophie watched his face, trying to read his reaction, but his expression remained carefully neutral. Camilla stood by the window, her back to them, unable to watch. When Harry finished, he set the papers down slowly. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "It's not enough," he said. "Nothing could be enough. But it's honest. It's more honest than anything anyone in this family has said about her in years." Camilla turned from the window, tears streaming down her face. "I know I can't undo the past, Harry. I know I can't give you back what you lost. But I can at least stop pretending it didn't matter." Harry looked at her directly for what might have been the first time in years. "She called you, didn't she?" "My mother." After the divorce, Camilla nodded. "She did. What did she say?" "She asked me to be kind to you and William, to never try to replace her, to remember that you had already lost so much." Harry's jaw clenched. "And did you keep that promise?" "I tried," Camilla whispered. "I know I failed in many ways, but I tried." Harry stood abruptly, crossing to the window. Sophie held her breath, unsure what would happen next. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. "My mother was the kindest person I ever knew," Harry said, his back to them. "Even after everything, she still thought about others. She still tried to protect us, even from her own pain." He turned around, and his eyes were red, but his voice was steady. "If she could show that kind of grace, then I suppose I can try to do the same." It wasn't forgiveness. Not quite. But it was a door opening, a possibility of healing beginning. Camilla covered her mouth with her hand, overcome with emotion. Sophie moved to her side, offering silent support. "Give the speech," Harry said. "Tell them who she really was. Tell them what she meant. And maybe, somehow, that will start to heal some of what's been broken." The day of the memorial arrived with unusual weather for London. The sky was brilliantly clear, the sun warm and bright. Diana's favorite flowers, white lilies and roses, filled the chapel where the service would be held. Hundreds of people gathered, including dignitaries, celebrities, charity workers, and ordinary citizens whose lives Diana had touched. Camilla sat in the front row beside Charles, who had barely spoken to her in days. William and Harry sat nearby with their families. Sophie was just behind them, her presence a quiet reminder of support. The air was thick with anticipation and tension. Word had leaked that Camilla would be speaking, and the media had gone wild with speculation. When the moment came, Camilla stood and walked to the podium on unsteady legs. Sophie could see her hands shaking as she unfolded her notes. The chapel fell completely silent. Every eye was on her. Every camera was focused on her face. Camilla looked out at the crowd, then closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them again, she began to speak. 26 years ago, the world lost Diana, Princess of Wales, but her sons lost their mother, and the world lost a light that can never be replaced. Her voice was steady, clear. "I stand before you today not as queen consort, but as someone who knew Diana, who spoke with her, who witnessed her grace even in her darkest moments. The crowd leaned forward. This was already more than anyone had expected. Diana called me once, after her divorce, Camilla continued, and gasps rippled through the chapel. She knew that Charles and I would eventually marry. She had accepted that painful reality. But she asked me for something. Camilla's voice broke slightly. She asked me to be kind to her sons, to never try to replace her in their hearts, to remember that they had already lost so much. Tears were flowing freely down Camilla's face now, but she didn't stop. I made her a promise that day, Camilla said, her voice stronger now despite the tears, and I have spent every year since trying to honor it. But I have also spent those years in silence about who she was, she meant, and what her loss cost this family and this world. That silence ends today. She paused, looking directly at William and Harry. Diana was not just the people's princess. She was a mother who loved her sons with a fierceness that transformed everything she did. Every charity she championed, every hand she held, every life she touched. She did it while carrying the weight of being a mother who wanted to make the world better for her children. Harry's head was bowed, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. William had his arm around his brother, tears streaming down his own face. Kate reached over and squeezed William's hand. The entire royal family was crying now, years of suppressed grief finally finding release. Diana taught this family about compassion in action, Camilla continued. She showed us that royalty was not about distance and formality, but about connection and genuine care. She held Aide's patience when the world was terrified to touch them. She walked through minefields to draw attention to the horrors of war. She sat with the homeless, the sick, the forgotten, and she made them feel seen. The crowd was completely silent except for the sound of people crying. Even the hardest-hearted journalists in attendance were wiping their eyes. I cannot undo the past, Camilla said, and her voice carried the weight of absolute truth. I cannot change the pain that was caused or return what was lost. But I can stand here today and say clearly without reservation that Diana mattered, that she matters still, that her legacy deserves to be celebrated, not whispered about, that her sons deserve to hear their mother spoken of with honor and truth. She turned back to the full audience. Diana's legacy lives in the charities that continue her work, in the lives saved by landmine removal efforts she championed, in the children who received better mental health care because she spoke openly about her own struggles, in the homeless who found shelter because she refused to look away from their suffering. Camilla's voice grew stronger, more passionate. But most of all, Diana's legacy lives in her sons. In William, who has carried forward her commitment to the homeless and to mental health awareness. In Harry, who walked through African minefields just as his mother did, continuing her mission. They are her greatest legacy, and every good thing they do is a testament to the mother who raised them. She looked at William and Harry again. Your mother was extraordinary. She was flawed, as we all are, but her heart was pure. Her compassion was genuine, and her love for you was the defining force of her life. I hope that I have honored my promise to her by never trying to replace her, and by standing here today to ensure that she is remembered as she deserves to be. Camilla's hands were gripping the podium now, her knuckles white. I ask your forgiveness for the years of silence, for the ways the palace and I myself have allowed Diana's memory to be diminished to avoid uncomfortable truths. That was wrong. She was not an embarrassment to be managed. She was a force of nature who changed this institution and this world. The final words came out as almost a whisper, but the microphone carried them to every corner of the chapel. Diana, if you can hear me, I hope you know that your sons are loved, that they are honored, that they carry you with them in everything they do. And I hope you can forgive me for taking so long to say what should have been said years ago. You were extraordinary. You are missed. And you will never, ever be forgotten. Camilla stepped back from the podium and collapsed into her seat. Charles immediately put his arm around her, his own face wet with tears. Whatever anger he had felt was gone, replaced by something that looked like pride and pain mixed together. The chapel erupted. Not in applause that would have been inappropriate, but in a wave of emotion that was almost physical. People were crying openly, strangers hugging each other, decades of suppressed feelings finally finding release. Harry stood up. Everyone watched as he walked to where Camilla sat. She looked up at him with fear and hope in her eyes, uncertain what he would do. Harry extended his hand. Camilla took it, and he pulled her to her feet and into an embrace. The gesture was captured by every camera in the building. It would become one of the most iconic images in modern royal history. The prince who had lost his mother, holding the woman who had contributed to that loss, both of them crying, both of them trying to heal. William joined them, and then Kate. And then the entire family surrounded Camilla in an embrace that symbolized something larger than any of them individually. It symbolized the possibility of healing, of truth leading to reconciliation, of courage creating change. Sophie watched from her seat, tears flowing freely down her face. This was what she had hoped for when she confronted Camilla in that guardroom. Not perfection, not erasure of the past, but honest acknowledgement. Truth spoken with courage. Wounds finally allowed to begin healing. After the service, Sophie and Camilla stood together in a quiet corner of the chapel. The crowds had dispersed, the cameras had left, and it was just the two of them in the fading light. "You did it," Sophie said softly. "You were brave." "You did it," Camilla corrected. "You started this. You forced the conversation. I just finished it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two women who had been adversaries, then reluctant allies, and now something approaching friends. "What happens now?" Camilla asked. Sophie smiled. "Now we keep going. We make sure Diana's charities get the support they need. We make sure her story is told accurately. We make sure her sons know that she's honored, not just remembered. And we do it together." Camilla nodded. Together. As they walked out of the chapel into the bright afternoon sun, they passed Diana's portrait hanging near the entrance. Both women paused to look at it. Diana's smile seemed to shine from the canvas, warm and genuine. The smile of someone who had loved deeply despite the cost. "She would be proud of you," Sophie whispered. "She would be proud of you," Camilla replied, "for not letting her be forgotten. For standing up when everyone else stayed silent." They left the chapel together, walking into a future that would still have challenges, still have critics, still have pain. But it would also have truth. And truth, difficult as it was the only foundation on which real healing could be built. The guards who had witnessed that first confrontation in the Windsor Guardroom would tell the story for years. How the Duchess of Edinburgh had stood up to the Queen Consort. How she had demanded truth and honor for a fallen princess. How that one moment of courage had sparked a chain of events that changed the royal family forever. And in homes across Britain and around the world, people who had loved Diana felt something shift. Their princess had finally been honored by the institution that had failed her. The truth had finally been spoken. And while it could never bring her back, it could ensure that her light continued to shine. Undiminished by time or politics or fear, in the end, that was all Sophie had wanted. All Diana had deserved. All any of them could do. Keep the light shining. Keep the truth alive. Keep the promise that she would never be forgotten.